The letter said I owed the Willow Creek Homeowners Association $500 for storing an unauthorized boat in my driveway. I don't own a boat. I have never owned a boat. But by the time I finished reading that letter, Linda Voss had already turned my quiet Tuesday afternoon into a war, and she had no idea how badly she was about to lose it. My name is Claire Bennett, and 3 years ago my husband Tom and I bought our first house on Maple Hollow Court in Willow Creek Estates. It was the kind of neighborhood you see in a real estate brochure. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes. A community garden where the retirees traded tomato seedlings every spring. We fell in love with it the second we saw the wraparound porch, and for 2.5 years, life there was exactly as boring and pleasant as we hoped it would be. Linda Voss had been HOA president for 6 years by the time we moved in. She was the kind of woman who measured grass height with an actual ruler. She once sent a violation notice to a family because their inflatable Halloween pumpkin was, in her words, structurally excessive. She fined the Kowalskis 2 doors down because their porch light bulb was warm white instead of the approved daylight white. People rolled their eyes about Linda at block parties, but nobody fought her, because fighting Linda meant fighting the board, and fighting the board meant fighting the fine schedule, and the fine schedule always won. Tom and I did everything right. We paid our dues on time. We kept our lawn edged. We never so much as leaned a bicycle against the garage in a way that might catch Linda's eye during her Tuesday morning walks, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed up into her silver bob. She drove a white Buick with a Willow Creek HOA parking permit displayed in the windshield like a badge, and she used it the way some people use a police scanner, cruising the loop of our neighborhood twice a week looking for something, anything, out of place. We thought we were invisible to her. We thought invisible meant safe. We should have paid closer attention to what happened to the people who weren't invisible. There was a retired couple on Birchwood Lane who got a citation because their trash cans were visible from the street 4 hours after collection instead of the 2 hours the covenant allowed. There was a young family who got fined $300 because their child's chalk drawings on the driveway hadn't washed off before the weekend rain, which Linda considered unauthorized surface alteration. Every single time, the fine letter arrived with the same clinical language, the same 7-day countdown, and the same quiet implication that arguing would only make things worse. So people paid, quietly, every time. We were wrong on both counts, and it started with a single sheet of paper taped to our front door on a Tuesday in April. The notice was official Willow Creek HOA letterhead, printed in that same aggressive Times New Roman the board used for every threat. Violation Code 14. 3. It read, unauthorized recreational watercraft stored in driveway or visible from street. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 7 days or fine doubles. I stood on my porch reading it 3 times, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. We didn't have a boat. We had never had a boat. Tom doesn't fish. I get seasick on a pontoon in a lake with no waves, and our driveway that week held exactly one object. My gray Honda CR-V parked exactly where it always was. I called the HOA management office that same afternoon, half expecting someone to laugh and tell me it was a clerical mix-up. Instead, a board voice named Denise told me the violation had been logged personally by the board president during her Tuesday inspection, and that if I disputed it, I could submit a written appeal to be reviewed at the next scheduled board meeting, which was 17 days away. 17 days. With a fine that would double to $1,000 in 7, I asked Denise a simple question: what boat, what date, what time? She read off her screen, April 14th, 9:12 in the morning, a white recreational boat with a visible trailer parked in the driveway of 118 Maple Hollow Court. That's my address. That's not my life. I drove straight to the clubhouse, where Linda happened to be reviewing landscaping bids with 2 board members, and I asked her directly whether she was sure she had the right house. Linda looked at me over her reading glasses with the calm, unbothered expression of a woman who had never once in her life been wrong about anything. I photographed it myself, Claire, she said. I don't make mistakes about violations. The board's records are accurate, and the fine stands until you provide proof of compliance. I told her I didn't need to provide proof of compliance for a boat I had never owned. She told me that wasn't how the appeals process worked. I told her that made no sense. She told me with a small, tight smile that perhaps I should read the covenants more carefully next time. The 2 board members standing near her didn't say a word the entire time, and I remember noticing that, filing it away without quite knowing why yet. They just glanced at each other, then back at their landscaping bids, the way people do when they've learned it's safer to stay quiet than to correct the person signing their meeting minutes. I walked out of that clubhouse angrier than I had been in years, and the 7-day clock was already ticking. For the next 2 days, I did what anyone with a full-time job and a mortgage does when the world hands them something absurd. I complained to Tom. I complained to my sister on the phone. I posted a slightly unhinged message in the neighborhood Facebook group, which got exactly one reply from a woman I'd never met warning me that Linda does not back down ever from anyone. That should have scared me. Instead, it made me curious. Because if Linda genuinely didn't back down from anyone, then she had clearly never met someone who had actual proof. And on the third day, checking the app on my phone out of pure habit before bed, I realized I might. We'd installed a video doorbell the previous winter after a string of package thefts 2 streets over. It ran on a 30-day rolling cloud storage plan, motion-triggered, time-stamped down to the second, synced to a server we didn't control and Linda Voss definitely couldn't edit. I opened the app with hands that were shaking slightly more than I wanted to admit, and I typed in the date from the violation notice. April 14th. Filtered the clips by time, scrolled to 9:12 in the morning. The footage loaded in 3 seconds that felt like 30. There was my driveway, there was my gray CRV parked exactly where it always sat. There was no boat, there was no trailer. There was, in fact, absolutely nothing unusual at all, except for one detail sitting quietly in the corner of the frame that made my stomach drop and my pulse pick up at the exact same moment. Because at 9:14 in the morning, 2 minutes after the violation was supposedly logged. My camera had caught Linda Voss herself walking down the sidewalk with her clipboard, stopping directly in front of my house, and taking a photograph not of my driveway, but of the driveway 3 houses down where the Hendersons' guest visiting for the week had briefly parked a boat on a trailer that belonged to nobody who lived on our street at all. She hadn't made a mistake about the boat existing. She'd made a mistake about whose house it was parked in front of, and then logged the violation under my address instead of theirs. I sat on my bed staring at that footage for a long time, because I suddenly understood something about Linda Voss that 6 years of unchallenged power had apparently let her forget. Being confident is not the same thing as being right, and I had just watched her be both loudly on camera at 9:14 in the morning. The next day, the fine notice on our HOA portal updated itself without warning. Not fixed. Worse. It now showed a failure to respond flag, with a note that continued noncompliance could result in a lien being filed against our property if the balance wasn't resolved within the original window. A lien on our house. Over a boat that belonged to nobody I had ever met, parked in front of a driveway I didn't own. On a day my own doorbell camera proved my car was the only thing on my property. I mentioned the lien warning to a neighbor across the street, an older woman named Sylvia who'd lived in Willow Creek since before the covenants were even written, and her face changed the second I said Linda's name. She told me she'd watched Linda push 2 separate families into settling disputed fines just to avoid the lien threat, even when those families were almost certainly in the right. Nobody fights her past the first letter, Sylvia said. That's why she wins every time. It's not that she's right. It's that everyone else gives up first. That single sentence changed how I looked at the whole situation. This wasn't really about $500 anymore, or even about a boat that had never existed. It was about whether a title on a name badge got to override a video file with an accurate timestamp, and whether I was going to be the next name on Sylvia's list of people who quietly gave up. Tom wanted to call a lawyer immediately. Part of me wanted to as well, but something about the way Linda had looked at me in that clubhouse, so certain, so untouchable, made me want to handle this a different way. I didn't want a lawyer's letter buried in a file somewhere. I wanted Linda Voss to be wrong in front of every single person who had ever been too afraid to challenge her. So instead of appealing quietly through Denise and waiting 17 days for a private hearing, I emailed the board and requested to address the violation publicly during the open comment period of the very next general meeting, which conveniently was the following Thursday. Under our state's HOA disclosure laws, board decisions on fines were required to be discussed in open session if a homeowner formally requested it, and I had in writing with a timestamp of my own. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I downloaded the doorbell footage in full resolution and had it burned to a drive along with printed still frames, time-stamped and dated in the corner exactly the way the app displayed them. I requested, in writing, copies of the HOA's own inspection log for April 14th under our community's records disclosure bylaw, the same bylaw Linda had personally cited against 3 other homeowners over the years. I printed the violation notice, the appeal denial, and the lien warning, and I put every single page in a folder with color-coded tabs, because if Linda Voss wanted to talk about accurate records, I was going to hand her the most accurate record she had ever seen. Thursday night, the clubhouse meeting room filled up faster than I'd ever seen it. Word travels fast in a neighborhood with too much time and a very active Facebook group, and apparently several of my neighbors had shown up specifically because they'd heard the boat lady was fighting back. Linda opened the meeting exactly on schedule, gaveling through the minutes and the landscaping bid update with the same brisk efficiency she brought to everything. When she reached open comment, she called my name like she was doing me a favor by allowing it. I walked to the small podium at the front of the room and set my folder down. On April 14th, I said, I received a $500 violation notice for an unauthorized boat parked in the driveway of 118 Maple Hollow Court. That's my house. I want to be very clear for the record that I have never owned a boat, and on the date and time listed on this notice, the only vehicle in my driveway was my own car. Linda's expression didn't move. The board's inspection records are accurate, Claire. I documented the violation myself. You did, I said, at 9:12 that morning, and at 9:14, 2 minutes later, my home security camera recorded you standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, photographing a boat parked 3 doors down at the Henderson's address, not mine. I connected the drive to the projector cable that the treasurer, bless her, had already set up for the landscaping slideshow, and I played the clip. 31 seconds, time-stamped in the corner the entire time. Linda Voss, clipboard in hand, photographing a boat that was never in my driveway, never once looking at my house at all. The room went silent in that particular way a room goes silent when everyone is doing the same math at the same time. That's clearly a mix-up in the address field, Linda said quickly, which is an easy administrative correction, not a, with a lien threat attached, I said. That's not a typo, Linda. That's a legal action against my house over an address you got wrong while you were 2 houses away from where you should have been looking. Her jaw tightened. I photograph dozens of properties every week. Mistakes are rare. They're rare enough that you've never once admitted to one before tonight, I said, and I heard someone in the third row let out a short laugh they clearly tried to swallow. It's the third one this year, said a voice from the back. It was Marcus from the corner lot, who I'd never spoken to directly before that night. You fined me in February for a fence height violation on a fence I don't have. Took me 2 months and a survey to get it reversed. Another hand went up, then another. It turned out I wasn't the only person in that room who'd spent an afternoon proving to Linda Voss that her records weren't as accurate as she insisted they were. I just happened to be the one who brought video. I closed my folder and looked at the board, not just at Linda. I'm requesting the fine be reversed in writing tonight, and I'm requesting the board review its inspection procedure so an address error doesn't turn into a lien threat against someone's home again. The treasurer, a soft-spoken man named Arthur who rarely spoke during meetings, cleared his throat and said the fine should be voided immediately given the evidence presented, and that he'd personally note in the minutes that the inspection log needed a verification step going forward. 2 other board members agreed within seconds. Linda started to object, then looked around the room at 4 board members and roughly 30 of her own neighbors, all watching her, and said nothing at all. By the time I got home that night, the portal had already updated. Violation reversed. Balance 0. The lien warning was gone entirely, deleted as if it had never existed, which, as far as any actual boat in my driveway was concerned, it never had. Within a week, 2 other neighbors filed formal requests for their own inspection logs going back a year. The board approved a new rule requiring photo evidence to be geotagged and address matched before any violation could be issued, something that should have existed years earlier. Sylvia told me later that 3 older disputed fines, including hers, got quietly reviewed and reversed once the new procedure exposed how loose the old logging system had actually been. Linda finished out her term quietly, and when nominations for the next board came around in the fall, for the first time in 6 years she wasn't on the list. She didn't run again. Nobody I know ever asked her why, and honestly nobody needed to. I think about that Tuesday sometimes, the one where a piece of paper taped to my door tried to convince me I owed money for a boat that never existed in my life. It would have been easy to just pay it and move on, the way people had been doing in that neighborhood for 6 years. It would have been the comfortable choice, the one that didn't require a folder with color-coded tabs or a Thursday night in a stuffy clubhouse room in front of 30 of my neighbors. But the truth doesn't need you to be loud. It just needs you to have proof, and the patience to use it in the right room in front of the right people at exactly the right moment. If you've ever had a rule enforced against you that made absolutely no sense, you already know that feeling in your stomach when someone with a clipboard tells you their records are more accurate than your own eyes. Tell me about it in the comments. Because I guarantee you're not the only one reading this who's had their own version of the boat that never existed. And if this kind of story is the reason you keep coming back to this channel, you know exactly what to do next.